I never had the experience as a child, having this wonder. I felt that I was in some way growing up in the Stone Age.
So what I thought was a personality making art began to be really clear that it was self making art. It was universal energy coming through my particular portal, and how the yin needs a yang for support, for structure. I needed more structure to support these very yin-like qualities that were coming out of me seeking expression. Without that structure, I felt too vulnerable. I felt too...
Hi, Amy.
Hello, Ken.
Welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversation.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here.
And me too. And I really look forward to this conversation. I know you from several occasions. We have met a couple of years ago. You visited me here in Norway. And I also met you at the conference in Italy here in October 24.
Yeah.
And I know you are very engaged in the new Psychosynthesis conference or summit here which will be launched in the end of July.
Yeah, July 24th to 27th. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit about my background. I actually originally trained as an architect. And even then in my 20s, my desire was literally to manifest spirit in form. That's what I did my thesis on. This idea that how could a space in a way enable you to experience more of yourself? How could it be a space, be an invitation to experience more of yourself? And then for a number of factors, I got away from architecture in my late 30s. I was living in South Africa. And I was really struggling with deep fatigue and body pain, like debilitating. And after many years, someone said, why don't you try art for healing? And I was like, well, I've tried everything else. I'll try that. But I didn't, even despite being an architect, I didn't identify as an artist at all. So I started working with this really beautiful woman down there who does a lot of she trained in bridging polarities. Bridging polarities through art. So she had these beautiful mornings. So for 2 or 3 years, I think I studied exclusively with her, with a group, and then took the facilitation training myself and started in a way a practice of guiding people using art facilitation in this very intuitive, evocative art forms. And when I came back to the United States, I just wasn't, so I lived there for 16 years. And when I came back here, I thought, well, it seemed like everybody in the United States had master's degrees in something, which I did in architecture, but I wasn't doing architecture. And it turned out Dee Furman lived right around the corner from me. So I actually talked to her about therapy in general. And I said I was interested in the course. So it was interesting because she said, well, I can't see you in therapy. Here's Ann Yeoman's number. So I ended up that was my connection to the Yeomans. And I ended up by taking Psychosynthesis, thinking, oh, this will be a good framework for me to hang my art process on.
Yeah.
Little did I know it actually would be the other way around. So during that time, I used a lot of art exploration, this intuitive art, which is, very non-form related. It's more atmospheric, gesture related. And so during that time, those two came together. I began to explore psychosynthesis concepts through this non-intentional, non-form related process art. And I got to know myself so well through that in a way I hadn't when I had just done the facilitation training and work with it. Because I was beginning to just cut loose and follow things, I began to really wonder, like, who is making these pieces? Like, where are they coming from? Because they expressed qualities that I didn't recognize in myself. And I began to be really curious about who was making this art, what was coming through. And then just over time, that sense of the personality being involved in art, and then the observer, and then in a way, letting go more and more. So what I thought was a personality making art began to be really clear that it was self making art. It was universal energy coming through my particular portal, and how I create things, and expressing itself as it does through everybody and however they do it. But for me, it was through this art, and I just began to know myself. That figure ground shift of personality to the soul. I began to see that the creator is the soul, and as long as I could get out of the way, and also I think skillfully use our basic psychological functions as a way of interacting with the process of actually augmenting the process rather than blocking the process. And I can say more about that if you want. But anyway, that's how I got to where I am now, is just really appreciating that process, but also a keen intellectual interest in psychosynthesis because it's so rich and so deep and aligns with a lifetime of meditation and a study, Dharma study, and so many other things in my life.
How do you, could you give an example just to let us know more concretely, how do you work with these art? Do you watch images and then see what emerges in you, or how?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I do not look at images. And in fact, it's just the opposite, that it's usually just a deep tuning in process. And I can touch base with something that's moving in me. Of course, you can't help but do that. So I may be coming from a place or an experience that's living in me, but I'm not trying to hold on to it with my mental mind in a way. But the materials I use for the most part are wet on wet painting. It comes from an anthroposophical background. So the paper will be wet. The watercolor is liquid. And so it can't really form. You can't like make it into something very concrete. So it's a gesture right there. It's an atmosphere. It's a movement right there. Also using chalk pastels just by shaving powder on and moving around. So you're really having a conversation in color.
So you express yourself through painting, and your inner, it could be some kind of inner thing that is disturbing to you, and then you express yourself through these medias like a free drawing, because I've done a lot of free drawing.
Let me just grab one here. So for instance, this is more form than I normally do. This was done a number of years ago. And what I love about it was that it was kind of expressing a state I was in, which was, in some ways quite dense and heavy. And yet what appears when I did this, I was just making marks, making gestures. I wasn't trying to do anything. And what became evident was the appearance of some sort of uprightness, some sort of upright clarity in myself that was in the midst of all this thing. Now, granted, let me think when this was done, 2019.
Okay. I got it. Yes.
I'm making. So these are with chalk pastel. So I'm just making marks, and then and it's usually afterwards that I see what's there.
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, this has meaning to me because of what I was going through at the time. And I don't do public display, so I don't really care what it looks like. No. But an invitation for me to go deeper. I might take this and go deeper into one area. Like, what is this area that's deep underground? What appears deep underground? It could be in the ocean. It could be in movement. Whatever it is that I'm picking up. So it's in a way, it's a very private thing. It's kind of like looking at my journals when I
see that.
And the same thing with clay, but clay is very, clay activates the will in certain ways, in a different way. Watercolor activates the emotions, or is in tune with the emotions. Chalk pastel is a little more, not necessarily so much thought, but it's very, it has a kind of dryness to it that is, if you're getting, say, overwhelmed by emotion, you wouldn't go to paint, for instance, you'd go to pastel. Yeah. And so really, I just start by shaving a color onto paper and then just moving it around. I'll give you an example of how I might use it with clients or with my students, because I do it a lot with my students. So let's just say you're working with two subpersonalities, because first you have to develop the awareness that you are in a way, the observer.
Yes.
So, and you're in some ways conducting the conversation, but you're not. You're just the vehicle that conducts the conversation. So you might, I might tune into some part of them. Recently, I did the personality and soul. Not that they're parts, but I was having them understand how they relate to themselves as a personality versus how they relate to themselves as a soul. And this was after many months of working together. So I just asked them to close their eyes, tune into what comes to mind when they think about their personality. And then when they open their eyes, what's the first color you see? Because that impulse desire is very much in tune with where your soul is, in a way, where your essence is. And then you just shave it on with no net. This is gonna sound crazy, but you might even take the pastel and just move it, like close your eyes and move it around the paper above it, and see Does this want to go somewhere? So in a way,
Mm,
we're constantly tuning into an emergent invitation.
mm,
And it takes a lot of will in a way to surrender the mind.
mm,
And that takes time, not just will, but it
mm,
takes a lot of time because, of course, for most people, they start out with, "This looks terrible. This looks like someone did this in kindergarten. Why does it look like this?" Those questions aren't relevant here. They're relevant to the
mm,
personality, but they actually
mm.
aren't relevant to this process.
And
So I
what is the transformative potential in this? Could you share something about, when you draw such a drawing, then, we do all these kind of works in many different ways in order to achieve some kind of inner harmony or synthesis or
yeah.
balancing of different inner conflicting parts. So how do you experience the transformative process by this type of avenue?
Well, it's a very synthetic process in and of itself because
Mm,
the mind has gotten out of the way, and there
mm,
is some synthesis seeking. There's a synthetic energy, that unity energy, or at
mm,
least like a balance energy, which, as you know, is so important to synthesis. So how does it work? Let's say you working with two subpersonalities. You choose one color for one color for the other, and they're at war with each other. You could choose your siblings. You could choose your workmates, and then
mm,
as you begin to have a conversation between these colors, what happens?
mm,
Then you let go. Then you let go of the personalities, the people, you're the subject, and you go with the process. And that's where the magic happens. I always say it's like kneading bread. Like, you can have flour and you can have yeast and you can have water, but it's only when you really bring them together that something happens. And this
mm,
happens. Normally, I learn from my pieces. Like, I'm not telling them to be something. They're I'm just going with gesture, impulse, intuition, maybe emotion is urging me to, like, make a strong gesture. Um, and this is where the psychological functions are at play all the time if you're
yeah.
aware of that and you're allowing it. And then somehow you realize it's something, you meet yourself in a way maybe you haven't ever seen before.
Mm. So
Um,
it creates insight. So the awareness, you as the observer, you as the self, you get a particular insight into what is in conflict with you by doing this process.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And it may become in the form of, "Oh, it needed a support. This issue needed a support." So maybe you've made something and it seems
Yeah.
to hold the whole thing, or maybe it's an illumination. It needs a
Mm.
bigger perspective, and it works very much like intuition, where
Mm.
it's coming in some ways in a all at once in a way that you can't direct.
Mm.
So it doesn't always happen that way, especially if you're not really comfortable with just allowing the process to unfold.
Mm.
So, yeah, but what I find is absolutely very synthetic. Also, the unconscious I like to think of as this limitless field of possibility. Before we make a choice, there's limitless possibility.
Yeah.
Before we really understand something in the unconscious and how we understand it, it's limitless. We can understand it. You might understand one thing in one way, and I'd understand it in a totally different way.
Mm.
So understanding that you're opening to this field of limitless possibility, and every gesture you make, if you see it as guided by something larger than yourself, then that's bringing into formation a possibility or
Mm.
a comprehension, um, in a way. And I think that's recently I've been thinking a lot about will and creativity, especially in global times as we have now,
Mm.
that no one can take away your creativity.
No, definitely. But there's something I'm interested in here. When you speak, it's something like you have some kind of a trust that there is some kind of a guiding inner, perhaps spiritual force that helps you reveal what needs to be revealed. But in daily life, or at least in my life, I'm so aware that there's so many different types of forces in me that tries to pull me in different directions. It could be my personality, that there is some kind of a will to power,
Mhm.
an ambitious drive that just wants to bring me into the center. And then I find that it collides with my ethical foundation, my aspiration for being in service to humanity. So then there is this polarity between something very selfish in me and something very, you could call it transcendent, or the soul in me. And I'm not always aware, when I'm in the process, what type of force that is actually having the overhand, if
The upper hand, yeah.
Sometimes I delude myself into believing, oh, this is my soul that just wants me to express in this way, and then afterwards, I find out that, well, this was quite egotistical.
Yeah.
I really have to be more alert. So I cannot really always trusting, the impulses coming to me. I have to be vigilant in my discernment between the different streams of energies that is impacting my consciousness. How do you master this complexity?
So I would, it would be so much fun to do a conversation in color around that, like an art conversation around that, because that is something that is, it's a training, isn't it? It's a training to discern what is what is really the truth of something true coming through me, and what is tinged with that ego aspect, and how do I understand that ego aspect?
Yeah.
Just in color, just in gesture, and how do the two come together, and how does one transform the other? One day it may be one way where the ego is stronger and you begin to understand that, and then you see, but I think as you continue to work with it, you begin to get more balance. And I think that's what you're talking about. You'll never get rid of, hopefully, either of them in a way. You have to, no ego, no getting up in the morning and getting in your car and driving, right? But it's a matter of being in balance. And also, I mean, you're the one that talks so much about the loving observer, that in this process, you are always the observer. You're always the one that can make a choice about, I'm putting some red here. Like, I just feel it. I don't know why, but I'm going to put some red here. And I'm just going to put a little bit and see where that goes.
Yeah.
And I just want to get back to trusting, because that wasn't true. I think one of the greatest things that has come out of the psychosynthesis journey for me is reconnecting with that faith in the not just the soul, but spiritual allies. And I think that, as for most people, trauma disconnects us from that. Like, we forget that childhood wonder and awe where we are one with that. And then we get wounded and we get separated from that. And we feel so alone, right? Shame and pain. And I'm so grateful for this process, because that trust was not there when I started this process. I was very much in my, what felt like a very twisted, or a very, not twisted, but, stressed personality. And it's been over the years of learning to trust this process, because what I see coming back is so curious to me. Like, where is that coming from? And I suppose people who write feel the same way. You write,
Yeah, I write definitely a lot, I never had the experience as a child, having this wonder and awe. I felt that I was in some way growing up in the Stone Age. In some way, there was nothing in my environment that stimulated. So for me, it has been something that I mature into, because the type of openness and also the capacity of the awareness to distinguish that inborn divinity in some way has to be unfolded. So I'm a bit skeptical about, I think perhaps we are different types, but I'm a bit skeptical about, this understanding that once we were totally immersed in some kind of a spiritual realization as an infant, and then we lose it and have to regain it afterwards.
I wouldn't say we lose it. I think our connection to it gets obscured.
Yeah.
And I would add to that we're also born with kleshas. We're born with karma, basically, and that also
definitely
impacts our connection.
I think here we have different types of ontological understanding of, evolution, of how we progress through different types of stages. And this is also something that is very much part of the transpersonal psychology, that there are, there are one branch following Ken Wilber that sees that and I also believe Assagioli was aware of that. They believe the child is totally absorbed in sensations, and the I is not that present in the infant because it has not the capacity to know that I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. I have mind, but I'm not my mind. That capacity for self-reflexive understanding is something that we grow into later. And another branch of transpersonal psychology believes that the child is in some way have some kind of a deep connection to spirit from the very start, and then trauma close that connection or distorts it, and then we have to go back to the childhood wounding, and then we will regain the spiritual consciousness lost that at that time. And these are two different competing ontological understanding of human evolution. And I think we just have to wrestle with that puzzle ourselves, how we understand this dilemma. But it's something that is very, very much present within transpersonal psychology itself.
Yeah. It's interesting because I used to be a real researcher and academic, and I don't really care anymore whether they're two schools. Like, I have my own experience, and everybody has their own experience, as Assagioli said, open the door to mystery. So for me, I don't want to spend the time trying to define it and say it's this way or that way. And this is what I've grown into. I've grown from this very, this person says this, and this person says this, and it's got to be this way, and choose your camp. But I'm really more experiential now. Somehow, something in my life, and I think it may be, issues with body pain and fatigue, that none of that stuff matters. What matters is tuning into what your experience is. And I think that, I think in psychosynthesis, it's really important to experience it, to have experiences of it, physical, always doing exercises, not in your head, but really getting up, stomping around, whatever it is. So I guess I carry a certain naivete about, and that sometimes comes from my art, I want to say, because I grew up in a sort of Christianity. I had my Christianity phase, and I had my Indian guru phase, and I had my, this kind of meditation phase. And I've studied with, I've done retreats with Pema Chodron back in the day many times. But basically Vipassana has been, the insight meditation has been my path, and been to, Thailand and Burma and India and Nepal and on retreats. And one thing I learned, and sometimes those philosophies were a little bit cold in the sort of in the personal sense, and I needed healing. I need warmth in the healing, my personal sense. So that's when a lot of my healing started to happen. But I remember distinctly, it was through imagery that I did that. I in this imagery, I came to a fawn, a little baby fawn in the woods, and everything was spring, like green spring flowers. It had a very fresh, like that first budding of spring. And the person I was working with said, "Does the fawn know you're there?" And I said, "It's not a part of me. This fawn, this newness, this almost an ingenue, is part of who I am." And I kind of feel that way about maybe the spiritual realm and how I connect to it. I'm so curious about it. And I'm so curious to open the door for it.
I totally agree that it must be experiential. Psychosynthesis is based on different types of experience, and theory must come later. First experience, and then we build theory around it. Theories and concepts that in some way can reflect our experiences. So I think this is for any real, authentic type of psychology or spirituality, it must be experiential, or else it's just mind creation, and that's not that interesting. And for me, it's just very, I'm just very curious about these different types of ontologies, these different types of understanding about reality. And so we can come to so many diverse understanding of what is reality and what is not reality. And all of them is fine. All of them is we all have a little small view into that grand vision of the totality. And it's by combining all these puzzles that we perhaps get a larger view of what reality is. But until we get the full picture, we just have to stay open, have an open mind, and respect that there are others who come to very different understanding of reality. We have Christianity, we have Buddhism, we have Hinduism, we have Taoism, we have so many expressions from and experiences from people who came to very diverse conclusions about reality. And I think the same spirit must be present within psychosynthesis,
Yeah.
that we can come to different ontological understanding of what is reality and how
Mm.
do we unfold. And when I'm speaking to you now, it's very clear that you have some kind of a very specialized way of transforming through art, through this creative process. And I think this is, as Jolie spoke about the 7 ways to the soul, that, and this is according to different types of
Yeah.
quality we can have. And we have all the qualities in us, but some are more dominant, some are more present in us. And that's why some like to really go out on that approach as you do with art and that way of transforming yourself, and others go more into the body perhaps
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
really explore the sensory perceptions when they are working perhaps in a massage or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that is very true. I mean, it's interesting. I believe that this process has been very helpful to me, and yes, I bring it to my students. But actually, last night, we had the book group last night, and we were talking about beauty. And the
Mm,
exercise in that chapter is think about something, a quality that you find beautiful. And what immediately came to me, actually, it was so beautiful. Sorry, that sounds so trite. It
mm,
was quite surprised me. What the image that came to me was first a mist that that kind of arose. It was almost like unfolding, and then out of it came this beautiful, beautiful. At first, I thought it was a rose, and then I realized it was a peony. Because the gift that I was thinking of was that I really see beauty in other people. Like I see the beauty in another person.
mm,
And so whether I'm not sure it's artistic, but the idea that you're seeing that harmony, that possibility for beauty in another person and the fullness. I mean, the image went on because first it was this a full, beautiful pink flower with different tones and different layers and petals. But then off it was riding both a mist of its essence, of its smell, but also
mm,
droplets. You could literally see these little droplets. And it was just, it's what people are when they are seen for who they
mm,
are. And
mm,
I feel a lot my coaching, which isn't always art at all, or my teaching, I realize it's still manifesting spirit and form. Like that
mm,
rose was or seeing the beauty in someone is actually a form of their
mm.
essence, even though it doesn't have a
Exactly.
form.
Yes, yes,
That makes sense.
exactly.
So I think
Yeah.
that we all have different gifts, and that I'm passionate about art because it's meant so much to me. But
Mm,
I'm very passionate about the theory. I remember saying something to Tom Yeomans one time, saying, I've made an effort to like read at least half an hour of an article on psychosynthesis a day. And he just shook. He
mm,
said, not everybody does that.
mm.
This wasn't when I was training. This was just because I enjoy reading it. And now it's listening to YouTubes.
Could you give us another example of deep transformation through this particular way of working with colors? some kind of some kind of an experience you had, so the audience out there that listen to this get a feeling of the potency of this way of working with bringing harmony and balancing the opposites and bringing synthesis out of difficult inner states of experience.
Yeah. Okay, this one isn't color. This is using clay. And it was a time when I felt that I really was not connected to my will at all, and was struggling and getting myself out there, really being visible and taking what I knew lived in me into the world. So I worked with clay, and I made there's a process where you make these two balls, and you make two ovals, and you put one upright, and for yin and yang, you might put one upright and one lying down, awake, sleeping, however you want to. And then I just worked into it. And I first started with the yin because that was what was comfortable to me. And it just, I can't even remember what it became, but it became something yin-like, soft, maybe even it was a bowl. It was like a nest. And then the yang became something else, and it became upright. It became solid. It had roots, and it became this trunk of a tree. And then I asked them to come together. Now, synthesis, I believe, is a spiritual process. It's not something we do with our minds. I think so often we try, here's a triangle. Here's the two bases of the triangle. Then we think about what the synthesis is. But true synthesis, I believe, is a spiritual process. So I just brought them close together. How close can they come? And then work with them, getting closer. And then eventually the nest was on top of this upright, tree trunk. And I thought, the yin needs a yang for support, for structure. In my life, in that time, I needed more structure to support these very yin-like qualities that were coming out of me, seeking expression. Without that structure, I felt too vulnerable. I felt too invisible. So for me, that was incredibly synthetic. Oh, I just need structure. Which meant structure to my days. It sounds so straightforward, but I wouldn't have come up with that before. And it was about, my relationship to the yin. Now, I might do it now, and it might just be the opposite, because I feel that in these times, the feminine principle has to be the primary. That's what we really need to bring into balance. That's what's disappeared. And patriarchy has gone amok. And by really everybody, men and women, beginning to understand the gifts of the feminine principle, not femininity, nothing to do with gender, but the feminine principle lives in all of us.
Exactly.
Even in the yin yang, there's that little dot in the yang of the yin, and in the yin, there's a little dot of the yang. So how do we relate both to that feminine principle, and how do you relate to that little dot of the opposite in us? So anyway, that's
in some way, wrap it up. You had this experience of being not aligned with your will, and then you had this process in clay, and through that process, you actually connected with, organization is one of the qualities of the will, and organization creates structure. When we organize all our different elements into some kind of expression, then we get a more structured approach. So through that clay process, you activated a quality of will, and you in some way realize some kind of a better alignment with that aspect of yourself.
Yeah. I think if you can look at each of these, every gesture, every movement, every mushing of the clay is an invitation for what wants to emerge. You're giving it an opportunity for something to emerge. You're tapping into, there's limitless possibility. What is needing to be emerging right now through clay, water, through watercolor, through pastel.
Yes.
So I will say the other thing that I've done is I've done a number of workshops on the egg diagram. I've done it for Val Slidker's group. I've done it for my group. I've done it for individuals. And it's so fascinating, because that's a way of, it's like a self-portrait in that time of these unconscious energies that are living in you. And when I've done that, I've learned so much about what's happening with me. I did one during the pandemic where this sort of river ended up by coming right through the middle unconscious. And I was like, yeah, if I don't stay centered, if that eye isn't very clear there, I'm going to get swept away by this pandemic, by all
Yeah.
the. So it's well, my art teacher says that every piece of art, the woman I studied with in South Africa, every piece of art is a self-portrait.
Mm.
So
Okay. Is there anything of what you just described that will be presented on the summit? And perhaps you should say a few words about the summit. You are in the so-called portal group.
right, our
And
little holding the portal for everything to come through,
exactly.
creating it. Yeah, it's been quite a process.
Mm.
Yeah, so the summit, which is called Synthesis for Change, for a changing, for
Yeah.
changing world, changing times, which we didn't know how much the world would change when that name was
No, I
chosen.
guess so.
So it's really important. So I think the title is really important. I think there are any number of ways. There's no one synthesis.
Mm.
So it is at the end of July, and I've actually wanted to start conversations beforehand. So I've started something called Synthesis Dialogues, which you've been part of, just to see what's living in the field and to give people a chance to engage and
Yeah.
themselves open an invitation for the idea of synthesis. So there are a lot of wonderful speakers. Kenneth, you're one of the keynote
Thank
speakers.
you.
Petra Nocelli Gugesberg is Gugesberg Nocelli is the another keynote speaker. We have more proposals than we can fit in. There's also times for what we're calling emergent offerings for people who want to do body work, who want to do the spoken word, who want to do poetry, who want to do fire dancing. There are times for people to either sign up, put in a proposal now, or maybe at the time they decide.
Yeah.
So one of the things I might offer during that time is literally art techniques to use with clients, something very straightforward.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have done an art workshop in Italy, but I ended up by doing the presentation I did there. I'm actually speaking on the feminine principle because I love the artwork, but I feel that what is really important in our times right now is reclaiming the feminine principle. It is so out of whack that in terms of balance, in order to create a true synthesis, we need to bring that back online and really understand what it means. It doesn't mean the femininity. It doesn't mean the softness and roundness. It means so many things that we'll talk about and explore.
Do you believe in feminine qualities and masculine qualities? The masculine and feminine in a more Jungian understanding of it. No matter what gender we are, we all have masculine and feminine qualities. Do you believe in that kind of concept?
Absolutely. I just think that culturally, the feminine qualities have been downplayed, and the feminine archetypes have been, banished in a way. So to bring those archetypal energies back is fundamental, and celebrate them, and welcome them into a vital part of our culture. As even in economic models, for instance, I mean, there's a beautiful. You might know this because it's a woman in the UK who does this donut economic model that is very much based in the feminine principles of what's the least you need to provide well-being for your country, for your population. What's the maximum growth you can sustain without withdrawing from your resources? So it's very holistic. That to me absolutely lit me up. That idea that someone has developed an economic model that is not a linear growth model that depends on over extraction of our resources. So I can go on about that too.
Okay, Amy. I'm so happy for this conversation, and I think you really managed to express the way you are working and highlight the importance of the creative process and how much colors and clay and this type of work can actually help you heal and transform and gives insight.
I just want to say it's not just visual art. Like this is true for any creative endeavor. It might be writing, it might be singing, it might be movement. I mean, beautiful dance. It might be just moving your body for healing. What does my body need to balance out? So yes, I do it with art, but in my training, I do it with other things as well, other psychological functions. And I think really what I'm getting to is tapping into this field of limited possibility in any way you can. Can you get beyond the limitations of your thought patterns and your personality patterns into accessing this field of limitless possibility.
That's a beautiful note to stop. So thank you so much for this conversation, and I'm wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Kenneth. Likewise. Looking forward to seeing you hopefully in Norway.
Yes, definitely. Bye-bye.
Bye.